Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are going to be going over the 2024 schedule of the New York Football Giants. We're going to review the schedule and give our absolute ceiling, best case scenario, and then worst case scenario for the New York Giants this season. But before we get into that, if you have not already, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tackle that bell to get notified when new videos come out. We have videos coming out every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And once when the season starts, we're going to have weekly prediction videos of all the Giants games that you're not going to want to miss. So go ahead, like, subscribe, and ring that bell to get notified. And so before we get into the season, let's quickly recap on some of the areas of improvement that the New York Giants improved on. And I think, too, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Giants statistically had the second worst offensive line season last year in the history of the NFL, having 85 sacks. I believe it was 85. It was in the mid-80s. Only to be, I think, about 60 short of their division rival, who the Philadelphia Eagles back in the 1980s had like 100 something. In a 14-game season, that's impressive. I mean, I feel so bad for their quarterbacks. But biggest area of need was the offensive line. I do think they improved. It already was horrible, so any addition is obviously going to be a big improvement. But getting Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon as well, some other key guys also I think are going to be huge additions to the team. It's already kind of revamped. You still have Evan Neal at the starting right tackle, but there's still other options, I feel. It gives some more flexibility overall to the entire offensive line. I think they added on some more weapons as well. What do you think was some of the areas that you thought the Giants improved in the most in the 2024 offseason?
Yeah, I mean, for me, looking at just the wide receiver room as a whole, you throw in Malik Neighbors, obviously their first overall pick, and then you add Miles Boykin, Isaiah McKenzie, Allen Robinson. And I just think that room as a whole is going to be so much more consistent. And I think that's one of the things that goes underrated in like when you talk about skill position players is, it's great when you're the Steelers and George Pickens has like the 6-catch, 180-yard game for 2 touchdowns. But when he has that once every 8 or 9 games, like it's not conducive to long-term results. And I think you look at just this room, they got better in pretty much every spot, at the slot, in the Z, at the X. Like Malik Neighbors can play all of those. And so I think all in all, they just got a lot better in that room. And I know the loss of Saquon Barkley is going to be big, but I do look at this offensive line and think it's going to be much improved. Especially, I think it's just going to be healthier. You look, Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal, both of those guys suffered injuries very early on last year. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest improvements for this offensive line is just everybody being healthy and able to compete. And so hopefully they can maintain that throughout the season. But if they can stay healthy, I think this run game should be serviceable. Again, it's not going to be as good as it would be with Saquon Barkley, but I think that offensive line and that skill position group should be much improved.
Yeah. I think it's funny. I mean, just adding Malik Neighbors already, it's like, every receiver position is already better because he can play every receiver position. And so I think moving on from Saquon Barkley, as hard as that was for the team and the fan base, I think it was kind of one of those. It's just if you're trying to, everybody wants to win Super Bowl championships, and unfortunately nowadays you can go and get running backs a dime a dozen. I know he's different than everybody, but he was of no use to any team with the type of offensive line that the Giants had. And so it's unfortunate that's the way that his career panned out. Also unfortunate for Giants fans. They're going to see him twice a year now. And so
behind a really good offensive line.
Behind a historically really good offensive line, except for that one year in the 80s. But anyways, I'm very curious on what's going to happen just at the QB position because I think Daniel Jones has the shortest of shortest leashes. Leashes, not leeches. I hope he has no leeches. But Drew Lock coming in. I'm very curious how that's going to go. Just because, I mean, we have seen some good things from him throughout his career. And then in Daniel Jones, we've seen some good things, yes, but we've also seen some poor things also. And same for Drew Lock. I think that's going to be maybe a little bit tighter QB battle than I think it might be leading into the season. Because also then, too, as well, Brian Dable, this is now his 3rd season as well. And over exceeded expectations year one, definitely under exceeded expectations year two. So like his job, I don't say his job's on the line, but also it is New York too. It's much shorter leashes of their leash. Leash is going to be the word of the video. I will say, but let's go into the 2024 schedule and start breaking this down here. So the first 6 games: Week 1 hosting Minnesota, Week 2 at Washington, Week 3 at Cleveland, Week 4 Dallas on Thursday Night Football, hosting them. Week 5 at Seattle, Week 6 at Cincinnati. Nothing too crazy, if I'm being completely honest. I honestly think Cleveland/Cincinnati might be the hardest game. I think Dallas is going to regress. It's still going to be a tough divisional game in general, but we've also seen these teams play each other really tough, maybe outside of anybody that played Washington over the past couple of years. But I digress. But I think could be a wide range, because if this team does take the steps forward that we all think they could be, and to be honest, this team was playing well towards the end of 2023. Defense is massively improved. I know it was Tyrod Taylor in there, but they were still a little bit more effective overall as an offense. And so if Jones can come back and be the guy who was in 2022, if Malik Neighbors can be that major impact, I can honestly see a 4-2 type start to this. Like Minnesota, Washington definitely beatable. Seattle's definitely beatable. And then even if they win one game against Cleveland, Dallas, or Cincinnati, coming out 4-2, I think that's possible. I think 5-1 maybe is a stretch, but I think 4-2 is a good solid ceiling. That being said, though, if it's the same old, I could honestly see maybe 1-5.
I think 4-2 is definitely the ceiling. I was going to say 3-3 might be the ceiling, just because, and I do agree. At the end of 2023, this defense was playing well, but this offense was just so decimated that it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do when healthy. So I think 4-2 is a good ceiling. However, I really could see them, like, I think Washington has played them tough, like each game in the last 4 years.
Well, Washington's going to be such an absolute wild card. I mean, we have no idea. Is Jaden Daniels going to be Zach Wilson, or is he going to be a CJ Stroud?
Yeah,
those are.
My guess is probably somewhere in the middle, where most rookies are.
Say.
But
they're both the extreme ends of the bell curve when it comes to number 2 overall quarterback picks.
Yeah, and so but that is, that is not a guarantee. I look at all of these games, and none of them I think are guaranteed wins. I would say they will most likely win one of the games. So I would say 4-2 is the ceiling, but I think 1-5 might be the floor.
I do think 1-5 is the floor, because I think one aspect of that, looking into it, is seeing how the other teams have progressed. Like Washington was absolute dog crap last year, but let's say they actually did hit on something. I could see them beating New York, especially at Washington. Cleveland on paper should be one of the best teams in the league. Dallas, if it's the same team from last year. Seattle as well, if they can come back and prove, we've seen what they can do overall. Same with Cincinnati. So really, this Minnesota team, I think that's going to be the main question mark.
Yeah,
but that's why I think floor is a pretty obvious 1-5. I don't think 0-6 or 6-0 are even a consideration. So 1-5 or 4-2 to start. Then going in the next 6 weeks of games. Week 7 hosting Philly. Week 8 at Pittsburgh. Week 9 hosting Washington. Week 10 at Carolina in the UK. And then week 11 is a bye, and then week 12 is hosting Tampa Bay. Kind of some of the same. I'd say more favorable. I'd say over this 5-game stretch with Pitt, Washington, and Carolina those 3 weeks back to back. I think those 3 teams are going to be vulnerable. Same concept kind of goes though to what we said with some of the other previous teams in the previous 6 weeks. Pittsburgh, who maybe Russell Wilson is amazing, maybe, and Bryce Young now can finally take his next steps. I will say, to that game being in London, that's going to be a weird game for both teams, because teams sometimes don't travel really that well. So Philly and Tampa Bay, I will say probably right now, as of now, I would pick the other teams, but who knows what can happen by week 7 and week 12. I will say, as a ceiling, I think 4-1 during this stretch here, I think is reasonable. But I will say, I find it hard to see them going worse than 2-3 during this stretch.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look Carolina had the first overall pick that was traded to Chicago last year. Washington, same thing. Pittsburgh, I think, way overperformed their talent level. And Tampa Bay is a good team, but the Giants will be coming off a bye. And Philly, I mean, the Giants usually play Philly tough. I believe they got a win against them late in the season last year also. So it's not like Philly's been super dominant in that matchup recently either. So I think, 2-3 is probably the floor, and 4-1, I think I agree is the ceiling there. So let's move on to the final block of 6 weeks here. So starting off at Dallas on Thanksgiving, then they host New Orleans. Then this to me is probably the hardest part of their schedule. They host Baltimore, at Atlanta, host Indy, and then at Philadelphia to close it out, those final 4 games there. And honestly, I don't really see a way that they beat Baltimore, Atlanta, even Indianapolis if they're fully healthy. I think that they probably struggle in that matchup just because I think that offense will be fairly potent. They had a good pass rush last year, and all signs point to that continuing into 2024. So I think Indy just matches up well. So I would probably say maybe 3-3 is the ceiling, and that's I think if they beat Philly, Dallas, and New Orleans.
Yeah. No, I think 3-3 is gonna be the ceiling, and to me, I'm just looking at 1-5 is probably the floor. I feel like they'll probably win a game. Because this team they did have a decent end towards the season last year.
Mm-hmm.
Some help, I think, with maybe a little bit of an easier schedule, and Philadelphia falling off the face of the earth. And so I do believe that this is of the blocks of 6 games, this is the toughest one by far. I think 1-5 is going to be the floor. But 3-3 though, I will say too, they go 3-3 during the stretch, then based off the other previous games as well, the other series, that would put them, if they hit their ceiling, at 11-6 being their ceiling, because 4-2, 4-2. 10-7 because it was 11-6 because it was 4-2, 4-1, and then 3-2. So 11-6. While this would put them at 4-13 as their floor. And it may be kind of excessive. I feel like they're probably going to be somewhere in the middle. I had for my record prediction how they're going 6-11. I can see that 7-10. I still think this is not a playoff team just yet. But it would match your floor, though. Your record would match their floor because you have it going 4-13. So, what are your thoughts when you hear that 4-13 floor, 11-6 ceiling? You think that's fair?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I think if they go 11-6, they probably won multiple games that they probably shouldn't have. And for me, this team has so many question marks, and it is funny. If you're watching Hard Knocks right now, basically what we have said about Daniel Jones over the last year is we didn't want to go back to the draft to roll the dice on another quarterback when we had one that was probably maybe a little bit better than serviceable. So they probably overpaid him, but now he only has this year's salary guaranteed on his contract. So he's kind of playing for his season there. And even the Giants general managers in there are questioning if they should be going after a quarterback in the 2024 draft. And so
the
to
conversation,
me,
conversation with his kid was funny.
I've only seen the first 2 or 3 episodes.
I've only seen a clip of it, but he's asking all his kids, whoever the GM, Joe Schoen, I think is what his name is, as who do you think we should draft? The one kid said Jaden Daniels, and the GM's and the kid's you only get this job once. And it was very motivational. It was one opportunity to do this. If you're gonna blow it, you might as well go out swinging.
Yeah, that's fair. But that's the Giants front office feels the same way about Daniel Jones as I think everybody else does. And to me, I think this season comes down to if Daniel Jones proves that he's worth the $40 million and can take the Giants to the playoffs, then I do think that there's a realistic ceiling of 11-6. But I think more likely than not, he proves that he's not quite adequate enough to be a franchise quarterback, and they probably end up closer to 6-11 or 4-13, and they're at the top of the draft to get another quarterback.
We'll just have to wait and see because it's such an interesting. Because 2022, they came out of nowhere and they had so many receiver injuries, and that offense just looked phenomenal. I think it was a
Yeah.
Ryan Dable offense, and I think Daniel Jones was playing really well. And if that was peak Daniel Jones and he can't improve off of that, then that's going to be tough to see because I think what we saw from Brian Dable's type offensive is if you can get a guy in there and get shifty enough receivers, this team could be extremely effective. And it's going to be very interesting just to see how he keeps on doing. And that's where I think, like, if it's 5-6 weeks in, I bet, like, let's put another kid in there because we just got to even see. We just got to see, one, if this year's even salvageable, but then two, we got to figure out what backup quarterbacks do we want to have for the future quarterback that we take in the next draft. So we'll take a kind of wait to see. I will say, I know if we're talking about this, imagine Shedeur Sanders in that offense. Like with him and Malik Neighbors, that would just be wild. That would be wild.
I have mixed feelings about Shedeur Sanders now after going back and watching him, and also the NFL Stock Exchange did a good podcast about like the top quarterbacks in their summer scouting series. I think that would be interesting for everybody to watch. But they think he's probably like a late first, early second round pick based off of his skill set. So interesting to kind of see how this year plays out for the college quarterbacks, because that could very much affect if Daniel Jones plays another season with the Giants as well. So,
I agree.
But let's go ahead and we'll wrap this one up here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Giants 2024 offseason and what you think their floor and ceiling will be in 2024. Other than that, we will see you guys next time.